sort of talk about language and labels. And I want to talk about the power of naming. And you know that in the scriptures, there's all these parables, and they're fantastic. And some of those stories are nuts. But in the parables of Christ, there's only one person that Jesus actually gives a name to. And that was a man who was begging. His name was Lazarus. Look, I come from Omaha, Nebraska. I just flew in yesterday morning. We got 6 inches of snow or something crazy like that. Happy April, right? Well, if you know anything about Omaha, which I'd be surprised, and I think you're a little weird if you did, you might know that Warren Buffett is from there and lives there. He's apparently the second richest man in the world. The thing about Warren Buffett is that he's just classic, right? Like, he probably wears the same Fruit of the Loom underpants that he bought like 12 years ago, because he lives in the same little house that he must have bought in the 40s, right? Sort of in Midtown. He just keeps it simple. Like, he's down to earth. He's just a good old Midwest guy. And if you're from Omaha, you know where Warren Buffett's house is, right? Everybody's like, hey, let's go to Warren Buffett. Let's drive me by Warren Buffett's house when folks come to visit. And I'm like, that's funny. Well, in that story, right, in the gospel, there's a rich man, and at the end of this man's property, there's a poor man who begs. And it's so funny because we all know where the rich people live in the neighborhoods, in the towns or cities that we came from. But none of us know the name of the folks who beg on our streets, who beg in our neighborhoods. And I probably imagine there's not a lot of beggars in this town, but we never know their names. And so there's something, I think, significant about Christ ascribing the name, the only name given to any person in the parables, as that man, Lazarus. Well, I think about the power of naming, and I think about the power of language and label, and I think to connect this to friendship and service, I think that most of us, if we're North American evangelicals, we don't know poor people unless we've gone on a short-term missions trip. We don't know poor people unless we clock some volunteer or community service time. We just somehow, for whatever reason, we've insulated and isolated ourselves, and we've lived these very segregated lives. And it's sad. It's really sad. Who is the person in your life who's broke, who can't pay their electricity bill? Who are the people in your life who are poor that you're not in their life so that you can help them, but that they're your friends, that they sit at your table, that y'all go and get a cup of coffee? We don't typically know people who are poor, and to make matters worse, we start to use language that separates us from them. And so in our community, we try not to use words like prostitute, because that word over-identifies somebody with what they do to make money. And it becomes a slur. It becomes a social sort of entrapment. We don't use the word leper. We don't use the word beggar, and we try not to even say the poor. We call our friends by name because we know them. Right, Jonathan Wilson Hartgrove, maybe y'all have read some of his books or interacted with him. He's sort of, I call him the publicist of new monasticism. He was at our house for the last 2 days, and yesterday morning he was sleeping downstairs in our pull-out couch. Poor guy's like 6'9" or something, and it's like, anyway. And like early in the morning, somebody was knocking at the door, and it was this young girl. She was walking through our neighborhood, asking people for a pair of pants. Like, it was snow, and she was cold. She had no money, and Flea and I were still asleep. And when I came downstairs and we poured some coffee, Jonathan was like, "Y'all had a visitor this morning," and it was, and I could tell like he was really reflective, and I think he was really sort of troubled by this young girl's need. And as we sort of started to talk it out, I was like, okay, was it this lady with short hair? Was she wearing glasses? It was like, we know the people in our neighborhood who beg. We know the people in our neighborhood who are poor. And Jonathan and I sort of have this conversation about that. Like, that's the question everybody asks. What do I do when somebody's begging from me? And it's like, well, hopefully you get to know them. And if you get to know them, I think you'll know how to respond to them.